Hello, how are you? I hope you're doing well wherever you are. In this Faceless channel, we focus on Moro English stories. I hope you stay tuned and subscribe to this channel to enhance our learning. Today I have another interesting story from Africa. The title is The Wicked Princess and Her Father's Love. I hope you can imagine what I'm writing about. Enhance my creativity through watching my videos. They are supported by voices from different places in Africa and across the world. I still hear her laugh in my nightmares. It wasn't a joyful laughter. It was cold, like ice cracking in the middle of the night. The sound haunts me to this day. It all started when I went to work in the palace as a servant. I had just lost my parents to illness, and I was taken in by a kind old man who worked for the royal family. He said it would be good for me. Maybe I could get a better life serving the princess. The princess, Adama, was beautiful. Everyone said she was the pride of the kingdom. And her father, King Nadi, loved her more than anything in the world. He treated her like a treasure. He always called her my jewel, and you could see the love in his eyes whenever he looked at her. The king was a tall man, with a gentle face, always smiling. He wore robes of rich gold and purple, and his crown gleamed like the sun. He looked like a father of every child would want. But his daughter, Princess Adama, was different. She was always dressed in bright, colorful gowns, and her hair was done up in fancy braids and beads. But her face, it never showed any warmth. She would look at people with eyes that felt cold and calculating, like she was always thinking about how she could use them. One evening, I was cleaning the royal dining hall when I heard the king's voice echoing down the corridor. He was laughing, calling for someone, and I knew he was calling for his daughter. Adama, come to me, my jewel. He called out. The way he said it, you could feel the love in his voice. The princess walked in, her gown sweeping the floor behind her. Her face was pale, with sharp cheekbones and full lips, but her smile, it didn't reach her eyes. She greeted her father with a cold nod, and then the two of them sat at the head of the table. I remember that moment clearly. The king was so happy, laughing and telling stories about his travels. He talked a lot about his travels that day. Adama, on the contrary, said nothing. She just stared at her father, and her eyes, I swear I saw something dark in them. Something I couldn't explain, but something mysterious. What I wouldn't wish to associate with. Then something happened. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I was walking past the princess' chambers when I heard voices. I'm sure I heard them. At first, I thought it was a dream, a nightmare. But then I heard her clearly. Father, you're awake. You love too much. You should have known that love makes you blind. It was her voice, cold and sharp. I froze, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping. Eavesdropping in the palace was of one of the abominations. You couldn't imagine what it would bring to you. I could hear a king's voice, soft, pleading, but I couldn't make out his words, even when I tried to press my ears on the door. Remember, I didn't want to be caught eavesdropping. Then a silence followed, and I could hear the sound of Adama's soft laughter. Then next morning, I learned what had happened. King Nadi, who had always been so healthy, had collapsed. They said he had a sudden illness. The doctors came, but they couldn't explain it. He was strong, fit, and yet he couldn't move. His eyes, his kind, loving eyes, stared at nothing, and he couldn't speak. And the princess, she seemed unbothered. She went on with the usual routine, ordering the servants around, holding court as though nothing had changed. I watched every step. I watched her closely. I watched her every time she looked at her father. There was no love in her eyes, only emptiness, the hollowness we wouldn't wish from the loved ones. That look was questionable to me. Days passed, and the king grew weaker. He couldn't walk and talk anymore. He couldn't even sit up without help. And that is when I noticed something strange. Each night, when everyone was asleep, I would hear footsteps in the palace halls. I would look out from my small servant's room, and I would see the princess walking to her father's room. She would enter quietly, and I could hear her voice, low and cold, like a whisper. I gave you life, Father, but now I will take it. One night, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I followed her. I had to know what was happening. I snuck through corridors, and when I reached the king's chamber, I saw it. Princess Adama was kneeling beside her father's bed, her hands glowing with an eerie light. The king was lying motionless, his eyes wide open, but there was no life in them. He was breathing shallow. He was breathing just like my father before he went to the land where people never come back. The princess whispered words I couldn't understand, but the air around her seemed to thicken, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what she was doing, but I could feel the darkness. And then she turned and looked at me. Her eyes wide, filled with a deep unnatural hunger. You shouldn't have seen this, she said, her voice colder than anything I had ever heard. I ran. I ran as fast as I could. And I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for air. By the time I returned to the palace, the king was gone. No one spoke of it. They said he had passed away in his sleep. But I knew the truth. I knew what the princess had done. Years have passed, but I remember those eyes. The eyes of a daughter who loved her father, yes, but only as a tool, a stepping stone. The princess had used her father's love for her own dark purpose. And now, with the king gone, she ruled alone. Her heart empty, her soul lost to something darker than any witch. I don't know what kind of power she used to take him, but I fear it is the same power that keeps her on the throne to this day. No one dares to challenge her, not even the bravest warriors. They submit to her like some goddess. They worship her like some god. And when she calls, they have to respond and run to her. And every time I see her, I feel that coldness, that emptiness inside her. The same look she had when she took her father's life. Now, I live far away from the palace. But sometimes, I still hear that laugh in my dreams. I hope you enjoyed our story.